Welcome to the show. Watch UAP Truth 33. I'm John. I'm your host. And, dude, I don't even know how to prepare you. I don't even know how to prepare you for this. So, Weaponized Part 3 with Matthew Brown has come out, and it is earth-shattering information. This is true, and I believe it's true because I've spoken on it in the past. But if this is true, this changes everything. And if people wake up to this, we have a chance to change the world. So I want you to watch this with an open mind, really get into it. You're going to want to watch it. And you're going to want to watch it at the end because at the end is the most earth-shattering information of all. So please buckle up, go get a drink, go to the bathroom, take care, prepare, really get into something amazing. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Why the hell is Congress passing a law asking for UFO insiders from the intelligence and military community to come talk to them directly under amnesty about something that doesn't exist, isn't an issue? And if it does exist and is an issue, but it's secret, apparently our most sensitive congressional committees are not briefed on this.
That's important. I just want to say this. If this was such a fiction, this was all false. This was just some conspiracy theorists, insiders just making some shit up. Why would Congress be asking for insiders to come speak to them? And another thing I'd like to point out is when Matthew Brown first attempted to do this, their staffers, the people who kind of set the agenda for them, their assistants, their staffers, they were kind of cock blocking him, which people need to really take note of. Why would that be happening? Are these advisors to congressional leaders, the president, who do they really work for? They're unelected officials. And that would explain how an unelected person would have power to control the government, right? It makes sense. And he goes on to speak about a global cabal, which I've spoken about, which I've said numerous times. That's controlling this data, this technology, and using it to enrich their own lives and hiding it from us. Just something to think about before we proceed.
At the core, disturbing, you having Arrow even ask for whistleblowers to come forward to them, having Congress asking for whistleblowers to come under amnesty to come to them. Yeah, something's rotten with that.
And then also at the same time seeing the sort of UAP task force and its slow death on the inside, and the death of the sort of open exchange of ideas and problem solving going on. There's another data point that pointed to
IR footage. What is it?
Overhead persistent infrared. That might be a correction. That satellite may not have been an OPR satellite after all.
But this one, and you keep going on, a boomerang shaped, jellyfish shaped, tic tac shaped. You're not just making these words up. Like, you saw visual evidence of these.
Yeah.
This coincides with Skywatch, right? We're getting it from two different sources, two different people, two different interests about these different shapes. Skywatcher, him, just really awesome because they lend credibility to each other, right? It's corroboration, basically what it is.
And so did have George Knapp and I. We have been exposed to, along the years, a lot of visual evidence. But this one, the large disc in the clouds, just explain to me seeing something like that.
Well, number one, it's pretty striking because you're watching it from space. It's always cool to watch satellite feeds. And that's just something the general public doesn't get to see. And then, two, just the size of it. It was immediately like, whoa, what the hell is that? It was in, I assume, infrared, black hot for that one. So the white clouds around it. And yeah, it's almost playful in its activities, or like it was startled. But it's one of those cases where I look at it and, it looks like a flying saucer, but it might be one of the things that maybe that was actually one of ours. In the wrong place at the wrong time.
What do you mean it looks startled? What does that mean?
It's just looking at an area over the ocean is what it appears. And this thing just comes trundling along from like underneath the cloud cover, comes up. And then right when it's like almost center frame, it scoots off to the side and like tries to get out of,
like it comes into a survey and going, oops, somebody spotted me. I can get out of here.
Exactly. It was visibly, that's the feeling it had.
That was kind of haunting to me. We checked when we were with some friends recently. I never know. We are not qualified to know if some of the things we've been exposed to are legitimate or not. But when I get confirmations like you describing this and other people we've just recently talked to, I know that footage exists. We've been exposed to it. And I think that's a nice piece to the puzzle.
So they've seen it. They've seen the same footage he's talking about. That's what I got from that.
Puzzle for the public.
What about jellyfish?
Yeah, so I mean, I only heard that term once it was released. Similar stuff I had seen on the inside, and it was often labeled like a floating brain or an organic or irregular shape, so that's why it's in there. So yeah, I've seen multiple instances of irregular shaped things that look thematically similar to the jellyfish. I've never seen the jellyfish video itself. But seeing those, there's an instance of one in Southcom, right at our border, crossing what appears to be into United States airspace. Let me get clear. Undetected.
From Mexico?
I believe from one way or another. I can't recall the compass orientation right now, but I would assume into the U.S., which is why it was interesting.
You ever see any videos where we're engaging with them? Either we're chasing them, our warplanes or something, or going after a disc, a saucer, an orb, or something like that?
So I've seen videos and read reports of engagements, but not live, like we're not shooting them, but engagements where, either we are trying to intercept something, read lots of reports on that, and from other countries as well, trying to intercept these things. Each report will have its own shape that they're chasing, but guess what they are. But then, when there's an example in there off the East Coast of what would be classed as an engagement, where we're up there protecting our airspace and encountering these things and interacting with them in a way that we would consider hostile. And if it was anything else, if we had a Russian bomber patrol that had a fighter escort and they tried to box our fighters out, force them down from the wash, the jet wash, that would be a hostile engagement. But for whatever reason, we're not describing it that way internally.
So we're sending a plane up to take a look.
Yeah.
Maybe get a better look or even some imagery, but not to engage, meaning shoot it down, shoot a Sidewinder at it or something.
Right. I would, I'm not going to be able to say that's never happened, but I have not seen them engaged, with weapons.
Well, it recently happened, and we became aware of one. More details on that, I think we'll report on. And what happened was the missile, quote, bounced off. And so they're trying to figure that out. But, what does that imply? Like a field around it? I don't know. We also released one that was so embarrassing to release. We had to call it looked like Kermit the Frog. I think we called it Syria Dome UAP. But the reason we released it, because verified, we tried to engage it. We tried to shoot it. And I believe we hit it, but we don't know the aftermath or what happened to that. We reported on that is actual information, even though it looks so silly, we had to report it because it's UAP. So from the recent event to that, it brings me back to what you said, George, about the official orders back in Russia back in the day. Tell me that real quick again.
So the Russian military, from 78 to 88, they had a standing order for every unit in this vast Soviet military empire, any UFO or ball of light, flying saucer, anything weird in the sky, it had to all be investigated. And the guy who was in charge of that program at the Ministry of Defense said that there had been several dozen instances where they sent warplanes, to intercept these UFOs, and they couldn't keep up with them. They just poof, they're gone. But in 3 cases, they tried to engage and shoot them down. 3 cases where those planes, the Russian warplanes, crashed. 2 of the pilots died, and after the second pilot died, they issued an order, leave them alone. Because in the words of the commander of the Russian Air Force, they said they have incredible capacities for retaliation.
Wow.
So
there you have that. There you have that. So we know not to shoot them down, which would explain why whenever the drones were shutting down Langley and all these Air Force bases, we never engaged them, you know. And he goes into more depth about why we keep wanting to call them drones and why we would rather claim that it's some kind of foreign entity sending drones from the Atlantic Ocean, you know, because we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where they go. They're in the air for hours and hours and hours without having to refuel or recharge, you know. And, you know, that in and of itself is anomalous behavior. We don't know of any drones that behave like that. And yet they don't want to tell us that they don't know what it is. And he says later on in this interview that reason for that is because we don't want to admit weakness. The government, not we, but our government doesn't want to admit weakness. That, you know, look, there's nothing we can do about this. You know, we don't know what they are. We have no power over. And it's really that was really interesting part of the interview. Like I said, I'll leave a link in the description. Check it out for yourself. But let's get on to some more wild stuff.
Force fields of some sort around these craft that make things blurry, even for from a good camera image. Do you know?
Probably a very real explanation for why certain shapes, you know, are harder to observe than others. I think, you know, whether it's active camouflage and like the skin of the vehicle itself, that definitely seems to be in play, or a field like you describe. I've seen evidence of fields around crafts.
Yeah, some things we've seen have looked so bizarre, it makes no sense to my brain. It is possible, we've heard that from a number of whistleblowers at different levels, that what you're seeing could just be a part of a greater structure, you know? So it could be something like that.
We've always been seeing these things with things like radar. So it's, you know, it's part of standard operating procedures to deny this and to not acknowledge it.
Right.
I have one more.
Yeah.
Drones. So 60 Minutes just did a big piece on drones. Langley Air Force Base had these things flying over it for 17 nights in a row. Stayed in New Jersey for weeks at a time. Sensitive bases, restricted airspace at US, UK bases in Britain for days and days. We can't track these things coming in. We can't track them when they leave. We can't shoot them down. We don't know where they're from. But don't worry, they're just drones. They're foreign surveillance drones. Give me your take on that whole situation.
Here it is.
Well, if you're a member of the public and you are still listening to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, or reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, all of that is controlled. It's propaganda. It is shaping your life narrative, intentionally so. As for the government reactions to that, I was very disappointed to see a continuation of the dismissal of these events by the Trump administration's press secretary. I can guess why they decided, despite the campaign promise, to immediately address that issue, to not. Has to do with geopolitical situations we are currently involved in, and the fact that we are living through a constitutional crisis related to this issue.
Just seems to me that it is a worse thing to say these might be foreign surveillance drones, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. We can't track them, we can't see them, we can't shoot them down.
Right.
Than it is to say these are genuine unknowns. You know, it seems like they're unknowns, not just some drone that the Chinese are floating off of New Jersey.
Well, there's an infection in our security thinking, which is that, you know, they're primicists. They must be on top. To admit weakness is to admit defeat. And to say you don't know what something is a pretty big signal of weakness. There's not much humility and a lot of arrogance driving.
Now that's huge, what he just said. And I referred to this a few minutes ago. They don't want to admit that they don't know what it is. And I get a feeling that some know what it is. But a lot of the leaders, I don't think, know what it is. I think this is a secret that's being held by unelected officials. Secret cabal. He gets into that soon.
It also points to, I think, the fact that this doesn't ultimately reside in the government anymore. This is held in an illegal internationalist regime, some sort of international cabal of sorts, mix of corporate, military, political, intelligence, and criminal interests that have come together, and they have subverted us and have taken this and have made it the source of their wealth and power.
So an astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, told me in one of the last films before he died, he used very similar words.
Well, that doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah, well, he was sure of it. You're a whistleblower, not a source to me and George. You're a whistleblower. We do want to help. I always hear whistleblowers are scared, and we know some people, the same people, but there's a lot that have come to us that you don't know. Are you scared? Are you scared now coming forward? Are you scared?
I mean, it comes in waves.
Okay.
So yes, but I make a conscious effort every day to not let fear rule my life and my deeds. So yes, I'm scared, but this is the right thing. It's the necessary thing. And I was raised right.
You think that by talking to us, it's possible that you might have some protection in that if somebody cuts your brake lines and you go off a cliff, at least there's going to be somebody looking into it and raise some hell about it.
If that happens, don't try too hard. Focus on the mission.
Listen to that guy. Now that's a very unselfish answer to that question. Don't worry about me. Focus on the mission. I like this guy, man. I like him.
And I think at this point, I'd like to say directly to the members of our military and our intelligence community, the time is now where you must choose whether you honor your oath or your orders. And if you have courage, you already know the answer. But for the rest of you, lead, follower, get out of the way. Get out of the way.
We know people are coming forward, and we know we've recorded, George and I, with other people who will be coming forward. So you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
But you say you could say more. Just explain that.
When I wrote this document, I've kind of given my state of mind and the measures I took to protect it. I'm also, familiar with ways that information can be extracted, that passwords and encryption don't matter. So I didn't write everything down.
So there are other bullets left to fire if you needed to.
Yeah. There's no Band-Aid. There's no wound. Mm-hmm. This is not about protecting, healing. This is about power and control. This isn't about trying to save what's good. It's about getting rid of what's evil.
Power and control meaning controlling the technology and what it would mean.
Those are just means. Controlling humanity.
Everything. Do you suspect that there are reverse engineering programs, that there have been crashes, that there are attempts to replicate that technology? You got hints of it in the ARV or RV, that we're trying to build what these things can do. Do you think we've done it, that we've accomplished it? Somebody?
Yeah, I think we've absolutely replicated some of these capabilities in inferior forms, and oftentimes maybe disaggregated from what was at once a unitary system, but we're only able to do a small part with that system. The U.S. military might be allowed to use some of this technology in the national defense, but I don't think they ultimately have control over it.
That's big.
Are one that I could not understand if it is a game. I think they're both just as powerful as we think, but also less. And I think there is not a single they here. Certainly multiple factions of the same species, if not multiple species. And all the complexity that brings, which might be our best hope.
Do they have an agenda? There's different types. What are your philosophies on this? Like, who are the others? Why are they here? And you've touched upon it. I know we're kind of going back a little bit, but that is the big question. And I just wanted to separate so people understand your exposure and your personal conclusions.
So I have been exposed to no direct information on the anatomy, biology, intentions, culture, politics.
Never came across those files?
Never came across those. I think those are all some of the deepest secrets.
Right. They would be if this is correct information.
Mm-hmm. What I have learned is that we live in a dream, a carefully constructed reality. We make use of a science that is tightly controlled and suppressed and distorted, I think we are left behind.
Humans.
I think normies, the normal humans, the people have been left behind. Us. People need to understand that we might have freedom of speech, but that has been subverted. We do not have freedom of inquiry. We are blocked from learning what we need to know. Just in the public world, we are blocked from advancing in science. We are taught false science intentionally to prevent us from learning more. We live in the Matrix. It's just much more boring than the movie.
Guy's probably afraid for his life. You know, he's had a hell of a struggle, a hell of a journey through this process that he's been going through to get this out to us. He seemed very genuine. I do not think that this was just merely a war game, like others have stated. For those of you that aren't familiar, so I guess on the cover of the file where he discovered a lot of these classified documents that he had read, transcripts and such, it had said like Shriver war game. And some people have speculated that maybe this is all just made up. This is all just a war game, you know. But then that would call into question, you know, what about the footage that he saw and you know, the actual transcripts between Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and at the time Senator Marco Rubio, where he said that's when his blood ran cold and that he knew that the American public was being deceived. So I don't think this was just a war game. I think maybe it was maybe an accidental leak. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be where he found it. I guess this is like a private internet that they use. Um, no, I think what he found was legit. I think he believes everything that he's saying, and I really don't see any kind of deception in the man. You know, they were asking questions. Some of the questions were tough questions, especially from George Knapp. Um, one of the things that I found really, really interesting was the process of how the Immaculate Constellation document got into the hearing, the second hearing. Now I'm talking about the hearing where Lou Elizondo, Mike Gold from NASA, Tim Gallaudet, and Michael Schellenberg. And these were the people on the panel of that hearing. And what I found really interesting was that so the congressmen and women, they have a staff, and the staff is kind of the people who direct the agenda of that congressman or woman. And when that document got entered into the record, you know, at the hearing in real time, like it wasn't like given to them ahead of time, you know, for them to kind of proofread it. It was kind of entered into evidence right there, right then. And you saw that the aides, you know, all these congressional aides were kind of buzzing around, whispering in the ears of these representatives, and it did seem like they were kind of panicked, and that's what Matthew Brown is saying, that these these aides were like in a panic, and that he he had a really hard time getting this in front of Congress because these aides were kind of, you know, cock blocking them, you know, for lack of a better term. For me to believe that there's a bit of credibility. But when he referred to the congressional aides as minions, right? It brings me back to something that I've heard in the past, that these controllers who kind of control a lot of world affairs aren't really the leaders, but the staff, the advisors. Um, you know, like in a judge's courtroom, the tip staff is the person you really want to get close with. The tip staff has the judge's ear. Tip staff has a way of presenting things to the judge, and the judge trusts his tip staff to advise them about the law or, you know, how he should proceed. This is a known fact, at least in Pittsburgh, in the courthouses around here. The tip staff has a huge amount of power, just like the clerk of courts. So court clerk, you know. So when he spoke about these aides and these minions, who kind of set the agenda for the congressman or woman, it led me back to Diana Pasulka in her interview on the Sean Ryan show, where she was talking about Aldous Huxley and how he was giving a speech, and they were speaking about these controllers not actually being the leaders, but being the people who have the ear of the leader.
You think that there may be families or what I mean, who holds the key?
Okay, so you're asking who are the puppet masters?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I asked too. So when we're taught in college or high school, we're taught the Plato's Republic thing and the allegory of the cave. And, if you pay attention, you know that these people are in a cave and these puppet masters are making puppets on the wall, and people think that that's reality. And then one lucky person gets out and goes up out of the cave and says, wow, there's a whole reality out here. I have an obligation to go back and tell these people that they're in a cave. They go back to tell the person they're in the cave. And this is how Socrates talks about it, says, they'll kill you because they think you're crazy. And in fact, they think that person's crazy. Okay, so, all right. So that's kind of the setup. My question has always been, and then you talk about it as a metaphor in college and stuff, and your professor talks about it. But my question was and my daughter, by the way, took a college class and it was on that. And so I said, who do you think those puppet masters are? And she said, Mama, that's just an allegory. There are no real puppet masters. And I was like, no, I think there are. Think about it again. Go read it again. And so then I'd ask friends of mine who, had read it and should know. And they were like, dang, I never thought about that. Finally, I found a philosopher who reached out to me, actually saw me on a podcast and said, these puppet masters, I agree with you. They're a real thing. Like Plato just doesn't put something in there. So who are these puppet masters? I think that's where George Orwell identifies it. And who agrees is Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley. So he has all your viewers, everyone should watch Aldous Huxley's, I think it's 1958 talk, maybe it's in the 60s, but I don't think so, at UC Berkeley, where he basically talks about the puppet masters. And it's his group.
Wow. Does he talk about how, so to pass on, to be, so what, are they born into the
it's an oligarchy. Mastery? Yeah, he says it's the oligarchy. He goes, it's always existed and presumably always will. That's how he opens his speech. It's a horrifying, enlightening talk. Everyone should watch it. It's free on just internet search it, DuckDuckGo it or whatnot. It'll come up. And he's a super articulate elite. And he writes Brave New World. And he tells us how it's going to happen. And we're going to like our servitude because we'll be taking drugs. That's pretty much it.
How does this get passed on from generation to generation over thousands of years without
okay, so this answer was provided to me, actually. I don't know if it's true, though, but by the counterintelligence group. So basically, there was a person who had been connected to a family that had been around since traces are reached back to 1200. And this family was they weren't the kings, but they were the people, I forgot their name, but they have a specific name, but it's the person who takes care of the bedpan of the king. Do you know that person? So there's a specific job. The bedpan, of course, is the bathroom, like the toilet for the king. And this person has to change it for the king so that it's always nice and clean. Now, this person has access to the most private parts of what the king knows. And this later becomes, this is what this person says, intelligence communities. Goes into the Vatican. And these people become the people who gather the intelligence.
It's really interesting. I just found that, whenever he was mentioning this, it brought me back to Diana Pasulka and this whole idea of the controllers, this whole idea of like we're living in Plato's cave. Like everything's kind of like a carefully constructed illusion, and that we're really not experiencing reality for what it is. And Matthew Brown said that in as many words. So I'm going to leave a link in the description. I really implore you guys to go watch that. It's Weaponized, Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, and they're interviewing Matthew Brown. It's part 3. And the guy almost breaks down in tears. He's a genuine whistleblower. This guy, you know, he seems like he has a trigger where if anything would happen to him, it's like a dead man trigger where, you know, some seriously sensitive stuff is going to come out. Probably some stuff that didn't get approved by DOPSR. And for those of you that don't know, DOPSR is kind of like a they pretty much have the say so of what these whistleblowers can and can't reveal to the public. It's like a publication, you know, they're in control of what they can publish, you know, release to the public when it comes to these subjects. So, you know, really interesting episode, man. It really was. I'll leave the link in the description. Please go check it out. One of the things that was kind of discouraging to me, but now looking back on it, it's really not that big of a deal, was that I always thought that the Immaculate Constellation was a actual government report that the government actually wrote and authored. No, that's not the case. So Matthew Brown is the author of the Immaculate Constellation document. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not true. It doesn't mean that he just made this shit up. It just means that it wasn't authored by or released by a government agency, which I would think actually lends more credibility to its classification level and the fact that they really didn't want this to get out. So he actually authored the Immaculate Constellation document. If you haven't seen that episode, I did an episode on the Immaculate Constellation document where I go into detail about some of the incidents that he writes about. One being I believe it was an F-22 fighter pilot, and he tried to lock onto one of these things. He was going to shoot it. It was a group of UAPs, right? And he attempted to shoot it, and he was on a mission, and these UAPs surrounded his plane and kind of just crowded him and ushered him out of the area. And that sounds about right. It checks out like that. I could see, you know, this is the type of interactions that we have with these craft. I believe he was in the Middle East. Man, you know what? I might even add that to this episode. I might take a piece of that episode, add it into here just to go over that particular situation again, because I found it really interesting. And, you know, and Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, they spoke of seeing footage of an attempted shoot down of one of these UAP and the missile just bouncing off of it, which kind of just, they said it was like absurd, you know, like, and I know I've posted footage to Afghanistan, the 2 UAPs that were like dripping molten something was dripping off of the bottom. There was 2 like orbs. They were dripping molten something off of the bottom of the craft, and they were hit with the missile, and the missile went right through them, and they seemed like they broke apart, but then went right back together again. So we've seen, you know, and apparently the Russians had a really bad experience with this, and they claim that these things have the ability to retaliate. That's just like, you know, crazy. So they don't even, that's why nobody shoots, you know, which kind of goes into the reason why we don't try to shoot at these drones that shut down Langley, Wright Pat, you know, Lake and Heath, you know, all these Air Force bases. If you haven't seen that episode, I also did an episode on that, UAPs and Air Force bases. It's all really interesting, man. And yeah, he in this Immaculate Constellation document that he authored, he talks about these different shaped craft, jellyfish, the tic tac, all these different, and he goes over all of them. And it's kind of, and listen, let's not forget this all coincides with Skywatcher, and they actually have categorized the different craft that they've come in contact with. So these different people who were previously in the military, were previously at the Pentagon, they've written about, they've, you know, shown us the different craft that they come into contact with. And George Knapp asked him, you know, well, why are they always these different craft, different shapes, different sizes? What's the reason? He said he thinks they're made to spec. So They're made for a specific mission. They send them out, so they're specifically like manufactured for whatever mission that they're going out on. And this is why they're different shapes, different sizes, and which would make sense. We've heard that before too from an anonymous Reddit whistleblower who spoke about a underwater base that moves, and that actually creates these craft, to spec for whatever that mission is. So that makes sense. And he said that there's, if not multiple factions of one species of ETs, um, there's possibly multiple factions of species of ET. So basically, not to be too confusing, that kind of sounded confusing even to myself. But so if there's just one species of ETs, there's multiple factions of that one species with different agendas, or there's different factions of multiple species of ETs. I hope that came out a little better. So we're either dealing with multiples of ETs, different types, or we're dealing with one type that are multiple factions, which would make sense. I'm not sure. I don't know if any of you guys, what do you guys think, man? What do you think we're dealing with? Just, it was an incredible episode, weaponized. Those guys, I mean, I'm telling you, especially George Knapp, because he's been at this since the 80s. He's been at this since Bob Lazar, dude. Since we're talking 40 years ago, Shout out to George Knapp. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to run by you guys is, so I've been digging in the National Archives. Supposedly they're going to be releasing more, but they're not really like announcing when these releases are going to be happening. So I keep going back and looking for new stuff, and what I found is pretty incredible. And you're going to want to stay. So that's it. What do you guys think? Really, really brings me back to the Diana Pasulka interview about living in Plato's cave, that we're really being deceived about reality, that there is controllers, that they may not be the leaders, but they're these people, these unelected officials, this global cabal, this secret global cabal that is manipulating the world for their own ends, keeping us all in the dark, keeping us all left behind, as Matthew Brown, the courageous Matthew Brown, has just spoken. So let me know what you think. Jump in the comments. I'm going to leave a link in the description. Please go watch it. And if you're really curious about this, you can go back and watch my episode about Chris Bledsoe and Diana Pasulka and the Sean Ryan interview, where she really gets into this whole idea of controllers, Plato's cave, and this subject um, is very much related to all this. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like, subscribe, share it with friends, share it with 2 friends. We got to break out of this glass ceiling. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Yes, this is a small channel. We're growing, and I appreciate all of you who help. Thank you. And until tomorrow. Peace.